Hi everyone, my name is Courtney and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be reviewing and discussing The Hollow Heart by Marie Rutkoski. And I'm also going to just be discussing the duology as a complete thing. So a little bit of a review for The Midnight Lie as well as the full review of The Hollow Heart. So of course, there's going to be spoilers in this review, but before we get into spoiler territory, let me give you a brief summary of the first book as well as kind of my thoughts about the series as a whole. The Midnight Lie follows a young woman named Nareem. She has grown up in a small walled community inside a much larger city, and this walled community is kind of like where the poor reside. It's a slum basically. She has a very difficult life. But one of the things that kind of keeps her going, that makes her life worth it, is that she forges passports so that people can get out of the slum area. The whole city is kind of focused around the caste system, which very much limits what the poor are allowed to do. And to have a better life, she forges these passports so that people can leave this area of the city, join a higher caste, and hopefully get some of the rewards from being a higher caste. And all of this kind of changes for her when she is put in prison one day and meets this kind of rogue sailor who claims to be a traveler, which is strange because there's never really been travelers on this island. And so the story is kind of Nareem figuring out herself, figuring out the secrets of her family, the secrets of this city, and trying to figure out what is going on. It's very internal, it's very character focused, character driven. There are these kind of like big world and plot moments and reveals. It's really focused on the character stories. And this continues into the second book, which is more Sid's book, I would say, which is the second main character and the love interest of Nareem. Sid has some connections to the characters of the first people of the series. If you don't know, the Midnight Lie series is a spin-off of the Winter's Curse trilogy. I don't want to give too much away about the connections of Sid. Just know that she is connected to some of the characters from the first series. And while I personally would recommend reading the Winter's Curse trilogy before you pick up this series, I don't think it's necessary. You can read these two as like a standalone series without having read the first series. You just might be a little confused, especially in the second book, as to who these people are. But this is a YA fantasy character-driven series, and it's sapphic. I think both of our main characters are lesbians. Sid is definitely a lesbian. She does not want to have romantic relationships with men, and I believe the same could be said for Nareem. So there is a lot to love about this series. I would say the series overall as a whole is like a 4 stars, and I personally liked it a little bit more than the Winter's Curse trilogy, but I will say that it didn't stick the landing at the end of the book. And so I want to get into that now, which means it's spoiler time. So I reread The Midnight Lie for The Hollow Heart. I literally opened up the first page of The Hollow Heart and I'm like, I don't remember what's going on. So I decided to pick up an audiobook and kind of speed read through The Midnight Lie. I read it so quickly. I read it in like 6-7 hours. I've said that this is like a slower paced series, a slow plotted character focused series. I just love The Midnight Lie because it is so well crafted. It's very close to the characters, and we see how their lives change as their feelings develop, as Nareem learns more about herself, learns more about Raven, her mother figure, as she kind of unravels the story of the city and like what's actually going on. I love The Midnight Lie. I gave it 5 stars. I think it's really compelling. It's a really fast, easy read in some respects, but it also is very character driven and has like this slow methodicalness to it that I really enjoy. I loved being so close to Nareem. I loved her self-discovery journey and how it was tied into the bigger plot of this world. I thought it worked so perfectly. And I also just love this series for what it does to the original trilogy. In this one, we are getting more of the mythology, more about the gods, more that they are maybe possibly real. And then as we learn at the end of the first book that they are in fact real and that they have these demigod children. I just love what that does for expanding the mythology of this world. And this series really opens up Marie Rutkoski to write another spin-off series of like the gods and stuff, which I I'm very intrigued by. The Midnight Lie, it's not a completely perfect book, but it just ticks off so many boxes. It's angsty with its romance, it's just methodical and character driven and internal, and the writing is lush. I just love Marie Rutkoski's writing. She really roots everything in like sensory details and like sensory memories, which one goes great with Nareem's character as someone who has powers with memory, but it also is just so perfect, just giving a very beautiful sensory experience of reading the book. The book just does a lot of what I love in fantasy and a lot of what I love in like character-driven fantasy, and it was just chef kiss. It was so good. So where does the Hollow Heart come into that? So the Hollow Heart follows the aftermath of the first book. Nareem has lost her heart to the God of Thieves, and Sid has traveled back to her home country to kind of figure out why her mom is sick and what's going on with that. So they are having their own separate journeys, and because of this we get two perspectives. But we also have a third perspective of this mysterious figure that is only referred to as the god, and sometimes the god is revealing stuff about their past life and existence, but they're also kind of telling the story of what's going on in the book. I really liked the opening up of perspectives. I really liked seeing what Sid was feeling and doing versus what Nareem was feeling and doing. I will say though, because Sid had the same like writing style of Marie Rutkoski, basically, that her chapters did feel more like Nareem in a way. I kind of wish there was a little bit more to differentiate her as a character besides just being in her perspective. I wish like the writing and feelings and thoughts were a little bit different, but overall, like, I love Marie Rutkoski's writing, so it was fine. I really like what this book did. It had Sid's perspective, who's at home trying to figure out what is going on with her mother, figuring out that her mother is possibly being poisoned, that something else is going on there, as well as she is still struggling with connecting with her parents, especially her mother. She doesn't feel like she has the relationship she wanted. She doesn't feel like her parents love or care about her because of her being gay. And so it's kind of her struggling through this relationship, struggling to communicate what she wants from her parents, and kind of repairing that relationship with them and clearing up those misunderstandings. I loved the journey of Sid's forgiveness of her miscommunication with her parents. I really, really liked that whole plot line. And then at the same time, we are following Nareem, who has become heartless and has basically started up a French Revolution style kind of riot. She's taken over as queen. The really compelling thing about Nareem's journey is that the God of Thieves didn't take her ability to love away, but rather her ability to feel compassion or mercy, which I think was just such a smart decision. At the end of the first book, I was really, really worried and nervous because the idea of taking a heart away, going into really interesting territory for me. I love stories where the main love interest is heartless. Howl's Moving Castle is one of my favorite books of all time, one of my favorite movies, but it's always really hard ground to walk for me because it's like, if you take away the person's love or ability to love, and the main character can't like love their love interest anymore, like feel emotions of love or feel emotions of lust anymore, it kind of insinuates that it is a curse or a bad thing to have those feelings taken away, which of course there are people that are asexual, that are aromantic, that are completely happy and fine with their life. And I don't want to make it seem like those things taken away are a bad existence. So this book, taking away Nareem's compassion, her mercy, what makes her her, was just so smart and like just made the plot so much more interesting. Marie Rutkoski writes these political stories. They're always very complicated and very interesting. She allows her characters to make these kind of big blunders that are almost like war crimes, but like roots them in very human things. So in this book, it's basically Nareem has lost her mercy and compassion, but she's starting this riot to kind of uplift the poor. So there's a lot that feels very justified. She takes out revenge on people that honestly kind of deserve it. Again, has like a very guillotine, French-inspired like revolution type thing going on, and a lot of it feels very justified. So at times I feel like the author was trying to say that the steps and actions that Nareem took were bad, but honestly I couldn't really see the bad in it. Maybe that's just, you know, where I am living in America right now, but I think it was really interesting because it was saying that rising up is not necessarily a bad thing, but like having leaders that are not compassionate, that can't show mercy, is the bad thing. That's where the trouble starts in. because not having compassion, not having mercy is really what drives Nareem to kind of be selfish. It lets her ambition get away with her. It's really complicated because a lot of the things that she does don't really seem like a bad thing in some respects. Reading about Nareem's choices when we ourselves in a time of like political uprising, are in a time of unions, when we are in a time of like job disparity, when there is a wage gap disparity, it's really hard not to sympathize with the actions that she takes because a lot of them do feel very justified, especially when we are in our own time are speaking against like the same issues. So when the author kind of insinuates that some of the actions that she takes are not good or they're not done with enough grace or mercy, like it's a little disconcerting to read about because it's just like, yes, maybe, but also like no. And I think that's where the story really didn't work for me, is because I wanted to see more of the consequences of Nareem's actions. The book really stops abruptly after the main conflict of Sid getting Nareem's heart back. So we don't really get to see the aftermath of all of Nareem's choices. If the path of violence is so bad, like why don't we get to see the aftermath and consequences of all of Nareem's actions? Why don't we get to see her make her own retributions to all of the harm she caused? I would love like an extra book just of Nareem having to build up the city again after she's made all of these devastating choices, some of them good and some of them a little more complicated and some of them maybe bad. I think that would just be a really compelling read, honestly. But the book stopped short, and this was the problem I had with the first series too, is that Marie Rutkoski introduces these really complex, nuanced problems. The first series is really focused on these two characters that are in like a relationship where one of them has been oppressed by the other's country for so long, has been under slavery for so long. And so for them to come together, for them to have a relationship, for them to be through war times where they don't necessarily do the best things to each other and their countries, like that is so compelling. But Marie Rutkoski pulls back a little bit from the consequences, from the difficult discussions of aftermath of like being in a relationship where one of you had family that was like the oppressors. And I think the same could be said for The Hollow Heart. Like Marie Rutkoski really pulls back from addressing like the really complex issues of like a riot by the people and what the main characters have to face because of their decisions. I would say overall that the ending was just really rushed. The entire book, the characters are separated from each other. It just feels very middle book, not in a bad way, just that the characters are separated and have to come back together in some way. And then the ending conflict of Sid getting Nareem's heart back felt really a little bit disconnected from her internal conflict with her parents and like her own feelings about herself. So Sid and then her getting Nareem's heart back felt a little bit disjointed from each other. And then because that whole conflict of getting the heart back was just like really quickly paced, then the ending just felt like really, really unsatisfying. In the entire book, we basically get barely any interactions between Nareem and Sid. And once Nareem gets her heart back, we basically get no interactions between her and Sid besides them getting together. You know, the quick little make-out session at the end of the book. So because of that, we're basically holding on to the threads of the romance that happened in the first book to compel us through them coming back together at the end of this book. And Sid even says that they didn't know each other very long, they only knew each other for a month. So I just think it was like not the best idea that this book ended where it did. If this book was 100 pages longer and it was just about Nareem and Sid kind of coming to terms with their feelings, coming to terms with their relationship after they've been through these traumatic experiences apart and together, and then Nareem dealing with the aftermath of her consequences, I think it would have been a lot stronger of a book. But again, honestly, I could have seen a third book in this series happening. I really could have. But as it stands, the last 30-50 pages of this book were really rushed. I had 20 pages of this book left, and I really thought, I'm like, there's no way this can be wrapped up. There is no way that this can be solved in 20 pages. Like, there has to be another book. And so when it ended the way it did, just so quickly wrapped up, I was just like so surprised and shocked. I'm like, really? That's where we're ending? This doesn't feel like the ending. Yes, everything was kind of resolved, but not really. It really felt like the back half of this book really needed to breathe. I can only imagine how much stronger it would have been if we had 100 pages to have more romance, to have more conflict, to have Nareem's actions more problematized. Because at the end of this book, because of Nareem's actions, even though she's gotten her compassion and heart back, she knows that she's a different person now, that she's never going to be who she was at the beginning of the first book. I love that realization, but again, I would like to see that play out. It just felt like there were so many things that would have been so interesting to see them play out. And that's kind of where I ended at The Hollow Heart. The first half of this book was easily like a 4 or 5 stars. The writing was lush. I just really enjoyed seeing these characters. I really liked all 3 perspectives. There wasn't anything that I wasn't enjoying. I really liked how the first book was very Nareem focused and this book was very focused on Sid and her journey. I thought that worked really well, especially reading the books back to back. But the third section of this novel started to feel a little fast-paced and not in a good way, and then the final part of this book just did not feel satisfying, and it just felt very rushed and like there was so much missing. And it's so hard because I loved the first book. It's one of my favorite books of the year, and honestly this could have been, this really could have been. And so it's just so hard because I love the first book so much. So I ended up giving this like a 4 star, a 3.75 star. It's hard because there are other books that I gave like 3.5 stars, 3.75 stars this year that I did not enjoy as much as this one. I enjoyed the reading process of this book, but just the ending was just so lackluster and so disappointing that it just kind of lowered the entire book for me. It felt very akin to the final book in the Cruel Prince series by Holly Black. Like, it hit all the story beats that the book was trying to hit, but it just didn't do it successfully because it was so rushed and so fast-paced, and it just felt like it needed to breathe. And it's so hard because I want to recommend this series, I want to love it as much as I did the first book, but again, the ending just really dragged it down and just made it a little disappointing. So what can you do? Overall, the first book, 4.5 stars. The second book, a very generous 4 stars. I think the series as a whole is a 4 stars. It's so hard because, again, there's so much that I loved about this book. There's so much that I loved about the series. It's been put out in the world, so it can't be changed now, unfortunately, unless we get like a spin-off novella, which I honestly would love. Those are my complicated feelings about The Hollow Heart. But if you have read this final book, I would love to discuss it in the comments down below. Let me know how you felt about it. But thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys later, and happy reading.